they basically said, rally everybody around and say goodbye. My mother unfortunately died that week in hospital, and I wasn't there, and I wasn't able to get on a flight to make it there.
I won't see them for at least 2 years now, it looks like.
And we've just had a baby boy, a baby Louis. My mum and Louis' grandmother has not seen him.
My mother fell ill about 3 weeks ago, and she was taken to hospital, and the hospital told my brother, who's been dealing with the whole situation in Australia, that she wouldn't survive. And so they basically said, rally everybody around and say goodbye. And I'm sorry, it probably makes me a bit teary. I'm really sorry. It's still very raw. So I rang several airlines because I had seen that they were bumping people off flights, and I wanted to make sure that I would actually be able to get home, but nobody could guarantee me a seat home in time. Most of the airlines told me that they could get me home within 2 months on the emergency list. So my mother unfortunately died that week in hospital, and I wasn't there, and I wasn't able to get on a flight to make it there. And less than a week later we had the funeral, and once again I wasn't able to be there. It's been hard because all my family are in Australia. We don't have any family here, and so it's been quite difficult to not be able to grieve with them and not be able to be a part of that. To be completely honest, I don't actually know if we'll even be able to do that this year. It doesn't look like that's going to be the situation. And I'm worried about how long the government will be, and Australia will be limiting all of these kind of, people coming into Australia. It's frightening to me because my father is turning 80 next year, and I don't want to have a similar scenario where I lose yet another parent that I can't actually see.
My father lives out there in Australia, and so do my little siblings, half siblings, who should be at university right now, but are instead locked up and miserable. He moved there about 20 years ago. Usually I go at least once a year to Australia. I've spent quite a lot of time out there, but he also comes to Europe sometimes, which he can't do at the moment, obviously. So it will be quite a big deal that I won't see them for at least 2 years now, it looks like. Qantas, which is obviously the biggest airline, have grounded their fleet completely until at least 2021 as well. So that was announced a few months ago, so that's not a good sign. He just thinks the whole thing is mad, the world response to the pandemic, let alone Australia's. Yeah, he can't quite believe it. It's a sort of virus with a survival rate of around 98%, and Australia's returned to being a sort of convict nation, he says. But I knew that it would be probably until early next year, but late next year, the end of next year, really it does seem excessive.
We've just had a baby boy, a baby Louis, who's now 9.5 months old. Given the fact that Louis was born in December, Mum had planned a trip in March this year to come over and visit Louis, and obviously couldn't, had to cancel that trip. To this point, my mum and Louis' grandmother has not seen him in person, and I know that that's particularly galling for Mum. I guess with modern technology, the world is closer, so we can catch up, and we do more regularly, particularly since Louis been born. So there's been more consistent WhatsApping and Skype and FaceTime. I think the key frustration really is once it's taken away on a permanent basis, you realise that you become a bit needy. You really want that thread, and you don't really realise that until you're in the situation where you can't return home.